All right, so we're going to continue on with exercise number 3 in our Chapter 0 Homework 2 video series here. Now, in this problem, we are going to be kind of working with some of the formulas as far as, the basic formulas we covered before: gross profit, net income, cost of goods sold, so on and so forth. So this is just kind of similar to what we did a little bit in homework 1 for chapter 0. So again, and in this exercise, we're kind of showing our work, as it mentions. So we're not necessarily going to be doing those formulas to calculate the amounts like we did in the last exercise problem for the journal entries, but instead we're going to kind of write out the whole thing there. Okay, so let's begin with number 1. So we know revenues, we know and net income, and we want to calculate total expenses, right? I'm going to make some notes off to the side as we solve these, just to hopefully make it a little more clear. So remember that revenues minus expenses equals net income, right? So that's cool. So what do we know? We know revenues, so we could say 195,000 minus some answer. That's the answer we're trying to solve for. Let's just call it, I'll just EX. Now I'll spell it out. So 195,000 minus whatever the expenses are equals 48,000, right? And this is just some basic algebra. Hopefully relatively basic, but kind of want to walk you through it just to make sure you understand what's going on here. And so remember from, your algebra class, if you will, or whatever that college algebra, whatever that class is, you're going to be wanting to isolate this variable of expenses that we don't know what that's what we're solving for. And so in order to solve for E, we need to isolate that variable. And so to do that, we would need to first subtract 195,000 from both sides. And then we can divide by -1. It's kind of, since we have negative expenses equals, let's say equals 48,000 minus 195,000. So that if we subtracted 195,000 from both sides, we would end up with 147,000 negative. And then our equation here would then read negative expenses equal negative 147,000. So in other words, positive expenses then are 147,000. And let's see, let's write it out just to show our work. 195,000 of revenues minus 48,000 net income, which is, really what we did, equal to 147,000 of total expenses. Perfect. Okay, just a little bit of algebra. Oh, and one thing to highlight, just in case you haven't seen it or forgot about this, if you see parentheses like that, that's negative in accounting speak, basically. If you do the number formatting, that's another way to do it. But typically we use accounting formatting, a lot of times without the $ as well. So if we wanted to modify that with no $, you can change the decimal places, so on and so forth. But if you see that negative, the parentheses, that's going to indicate negative. So keep that in mind. Okay, so here we got sales revenue, gross profit, and we need to calculate cost of goods sold, right? So I'm going to kind of steal this and paste it in just because we can use this as a starting point with the minus and equal sign. So we know sales revenue, I'll just type this out. I'm just going to say, I'll say sales revenue minus COGS equals gross profit, right? So that's our basic formula. What do we know? We know 325,000 minus COGS, which is what we don't know, equals 130,000, right? So again, we got to isolate our variable, basically. We can kind of do the same thing, 130,000, subtract 325,000 from both sides. That gives us a negative 195,000. If we were to have this formula I'll work it all the way through. What I would say is negative cost of goods sold equals negative 195,000. Or in other words, cost of goods sold is 195,000. So, and I would just say, there's not a whole lot of areas where we're going to be doing this kind of algebra work, but, um, it's still a good idea to sort of play around with these, these formulas just to try to get them in your mind. And there are times where you do kind of need to use some basic algebra when you're doing accounting work, not all the time or anything, but good to know some basic algebra skills. Okay, so let's continue on here. Number 3, we have beginning merchandise inventory, ending merchandise inventory, cost of goods sold, and we're going to need to calculate purchases. Okay, so I'm going to abbreviate a little bit just because this is going to end up being a lot of words, more than it has 3 kind of components here. So beginning inventory, remember that, plus purchases, plus, I'm just abbreviating again, minus ending inventory equals COGS. Whoop. Oh, when you put an equal sign at the front, it tries to make it into a formula too, by the way. So, okay, so that's the overall idea that we're trying to get to is, remember the beginning stuff plus the additions. That's the total amount that you could have sold products out of. And then if we were to go look at what's still left over, then if we're going to assume that inventory is either left over, it's still here, or it's been sold and it's gone and it's cost of goods sold, then we can kind of back into cost of goods sold just by knowing these variables, right? So with that said, okay, let's fill out our formula here. So 40,000 plus purchases, that's what we're solving for, the purchases, minus the ending inventory is 47,000 equals cost of goods sold. That's 172,000. Okay, so here's kind of the filled out, just we have one variable that we need to solve for, purchases. And so we can do this by using some algebra. The first thing we want to do is subtract 40,000 from both sides. And then we want to add 47,000 to get rid of the negative 47,000 on that side. So this basically gets rid of this, and adjusts this side of the equation for getting rid of those things and isolates purchases there. And we can say that comes out to 179,000 for our purchases. So let's type this in. We have 172,000 COGS. We could say minus 40,000 beginning inventory plus 47,000 ending inventory equals 179,000 purchases. Cool. Okay, so that's sort of another way to kind of isolate it out or write it out, I guess, in one formula there. But that's what we're solving for that by doing this algebra and equation work, formula work. Okay, let's look at the next one here. So now a similar problem. Let's just start with this same. I'll copy that down. And in this one, we are calculating ending merchandise inventory. So our variable now is this one. We know purchases. So let's go ahead and fill this out. So 60,000 plus 225,000 of purchases. Minus, let me write that. Put little spaces there. What are we solving for? Ending merchandise. So minus something, we don't know what that is yet, equals 240,000. Right, so that's just taking this equation, just like we've been doing, putting the numbers where we can, a little more space. And then let's isolate our ending inventory variable. So basically we need to get rid of all this stuff and then adjust the other side. And, we're going to have a negative here. So similar to the above, but that's fine. Okay, so we're going to start with 240,000, subtract 60,000. So we get rid of it on that side. and then subtract 225,000. That gives us 45,000. And that's our ending inventory then. And again, if we did this work to get rid of this and get rid of this and adjust this side, we'd have negative ending inventory equals negative 45,000. So really ending inventory equals 45,000, right? Okay, let's write this out. So 60,000 beginning inventory plus 225,000 purchases minus 240,000 COGS equals 45,000. And that's our inventory. Cool. Okay, last one here. What do we got? Okay, now we got to do COGS, gross profit, and net income. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit, give us some space to put these formulas in here because we're going to need 3 different formulas. I'm going to delete out this, but I like having just a starting point. So what do we want to say? The first thing we want to do is calculate cost of goods sold. So that's a good formula for cost of goods sold, this one here. The next formula, we're going to need to calculate gross profit. So that one's just going to be, remember, sales revenue minus COGS equals gross profit. That's our formula there. And then for net income, we're going to say that. I think it just pulled in because I typed it above. So great. Okay, so let's start with what we know here. Calculate cost of goods sold first, because that's that we need COGS first, because to calculate gross profit we need COGS, so we can't go to that part. And to calculate net income, we need to know COGS as well, because that's a component of expenses. So okay, so let's do this here. So we got the equal sign, but we need beginning inventory. So I'm going to say 65,000. Plus purchases, we know 235,000 minus ending inventory. Okay, 50,000. And this one, the nice thing on this problem is it's really kind of more of a basic. We don't need to isolate a variable in this instance. We're just basically solving the equation because we're given all the components to calculate cost of goods sold, right? So let's just do that here. 65,000 plus 235,000 minus 50,000 equals, let me put these in accounting format here, equals 250,000. So great. So let's just type this in over here now in our answer. So 65,000 beginning inventory plus 235,000 purchases minus 50,000 ending inventory. And that all equals 250,000 cost of goods sold. And now, if you remember from our last homework exercise, we're going to want to create some space here so we can drag our cursor down a couple notches here to do the next line. So hold Alt and press Enter a couple times, and that'll move your cursor down there. And I think we can go out and go back in. Never mind. We're going to have to do that again. Okay, wait a second, and we'll come back to inputting here. Let's solve it first. Okay, so next one, sales revenue minus cost of goods sold equals gross profit. So sales revenue, 450,000, just tells us here, minus cost of goods sold, which is what we just calculated, 250,000, equals gross profit, right? Cool. Okay, now let's actually do the calculation here. 450,000, 250,000, and that gives us 200,000 gross profit. So now let's double click back into our cell, hold Alt, press Enter a couple times, and now we're kind of spaced down here to do start typing. So let's put in 450,000 sales revenue minus 250,000 cost of goods sold equals gross profit of 200,000. Boom, boom, boom. Looking good. Okay, cool. All right, let's come down here and solve the last one and wrap this problem, this exercise up. Okay, this one, revenues minus expenses equal net income. So we know revenues was 450,000. Now we need all expenses now, right? So we need to subtract cost of goods sold. So that's the 250,000. And then we're also going to want to subtract operating expenses. So that's 140,000. And that's going to give us net income. Another way we could have written this to be a little more efficient, I guess, but I like writing this out just so you all are really clear what's happening. We could have taken gross profit as our starting point because what we're really saying here, the first two numbers, 450 minus 250, that is gross profit. So we could have just put 200,000 there. You know, if you want to calculate net income, you would say revenues minus expenses. Another way to say that is gross profit minus operating expenses. So anyway, but let's just do it this way. So we will calculate this out now. 450,000 minus 250,000 minus 140,000 comes out to 60,000 of net income. Okay, so cool. I'm actually going to move that back. Alt enter a couple times. Okay, let's type this out. So 450,000 sales revenue minus 250,000 of COGS. Oh, and I haven't been just bypass the dollar sign. I haven't been using that, so that's good. Stick with my formatting. And then 140,000 I'm just going to say OPEX, operating expenses. That's another way to say that. And then that's going to equal 60,000 of net income. So we didn't really need to isolate any variables or do any algebra in this last one, but this was, you can kind of see from beginning to end how we go from calculating calculating cost of goods sold to calculating gross profit to calculating net income, which is a pretty clear forward progression with like on financial statements, etc. So cool. All right. Well, hopefully that's helpful. Kind of really breaking things down. Like I mentioned earlier, this is not something with the algebra and everything we're going to be doing on a consistent basis per se. But there's some spots where you need to use basic algebra. We don't use real advanced math techniques necessarily in accounting very often. You're not going to have to do any calculus. You're not going to have to do any, advanced techniques at all, really. The majority is, basic algebra and then adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. That's typically knowing percentages is important, and we'll work with that too. Try to think if there's anything else. Those are probably the primary things from a mathematical perspective. You're not going to do any statistical work, in this class necessarily. We're not going to do any standard deviations or things of that nature. I'm sure there's ways that, you can combine those techniques into more advanced accounting research or something. But for the basic kind of work that we're going to do in this class, and I will also say for all the professional work that I've ever done in accounting, as a working in public accounting, working in private industry, working as a CFO in private industry, I've never had to do any kind of advanced math techniques necessarily in any of those fields. Just kind of knowing the basics and kind of starting from there, it can take you really far. So, all right, let's wrap this up. Thanks everybody for following along, and I'll see you in the next video. And we'll keep working through our series here, and we will finish exercise number 4. All right, thanks. I will see you there.